What the heck is the MP40 submachine gun? Certainly a not sentence to be sure, considering how much it had proliferated in popular culture after the late 90s. This is mostly due to the film Saving Private Ryan, which caused World War II filmography to become in vogue again, but this time in a more gritty and realistic representation, as opposed to the more noble and clean representations we had had shortly after the war. Of course, in video games, it was mostly popularized by stuff like the original Medal of Honor on PS1, as well as its sequel Medal of Honor Underground, which actually represented the French resistance, and as such highlights another quality of the MP40, so that it is associated with many different factions, rather than just its place of origin. This is mostly because captured examples of MP40s were highly regarded as effective resistance weapons, especially in urban combat environments. So what is the MP40 functionally speaking as it pertains to real life as opposed to the game? Well, it is of course a submachine gun chambered in 9x19 Parabellum, a very popular submachine gun cartridge, or rather pistol cartridge in general, used in various militaries across the world at the time. And it is still quite popular today. In fact, an easy way to summarize the MP40 is simply to look at the MP18, which is the original submachine gun. In fact, a very easy way to understand the MP40 is to understand the MP18. Both the MP18 and MP40 are blowback submachine guns chambered in 9mm, as we have said earlier, and they all fire from an open bolt. Both weapons have a fire rate of around 500 rounds per minute, though this varies a bit, and both weapons have 32-round detachable magazines, the difference being that the MP40 magazine is much more conventional and in line with modern standards, being a simple box magazine. In fact, to be more specific, the MP18 used a single-feed trommel magazine, which despite its enormous appearance only holds 32 rounds, whereas the MP40 uses a magazine that's inserted under the weapon, as with many other conventional weapons, and the magazine itself is known as a double-column single-feed, which means that the cartridges in the magazine are stacked in a double column as opposed to a single line being fed into the gun, which leads to the magazine being significantly more compact. In fact, the MP40 is actually known for issues with this magazine despite its simplistic operation compared to the MP18. The thing is that it used a single feed insert, which means that it is prone to malfunction, especially when it's being misused as a handhold, which was apparent in many World War II shooters back in the day, such as Medal of Honor Allied Assault, where the player character would grab the magazine. This is of course not unrealistic, because this is most likely what many soldiers, especially those not trained with the weapon, would have done when they acquired this weapon, because perhaps it is the more natural inclination to grab the weapon from. Of course, German soldiers were trained not to do this, but I suspect that this may not have been the case in the heat of battle in all situations, but that's just speculation on my part. Regardless, the intermediate between the MP40 and the MP18 is perhaps the MP38 submachine gun, which is very close to the later MP40. The MP40 and also its predecessor, the MP38, were designed in a manner to make them very easy to mass produce. While not as Spartan as something like the Sten submachine gun, it is much simpler than what we call first generation submachine guns, such as the MP18, which require extensive machining and as well feature a lot of wooden components, particularly stock. The MP40 itself was largely made due to stamped and electro spot welding, which made it much easier to produce, as the skill required for this kind of work is much less than machining, which has to be mostly done by hand by a skilled gunsmith. The materials features on the MP40 are, for the time, very futuristic, featuring a lot of aluminum, steel and bakelite. Bakelite being one of the first, if not the first, mass-produced plastic. Production lasted from 1940 to 1945 and totaled around 1.1 million units, which is a lot compared to the MP18, which only had around 30,000 built between the years of 1918 and 1920, largely because of how complicated the MP18 actually was to produce, and well, of course, being World War I Germany, they were much more starved of resources. Anyway, let's move on to the game. The MP40 in-game is also a submachine gun which fires at 540 rounds per minute, featuring a 4 to 8 bullet kill. This is extremely typical of pretty much all submachine guns other than the MP34, which features a 4 to 7 bullet kill. The strength of the MP40 lies in its accuracy, though I would say that this 10 is a better weapon for this purpose simply because this 10 has a much softer recoil pattern, which is quite jarring at first, mostly because this recoil pattern is partly generated from spread increase, and the idea of converting spread increase to recoil decrease, or rather recoil increase, is a bit confusing, especially to veteran players of the franchise. It's not a bad system, but I would like it to be toggleable, and this is something DICE is actually working on. Regardless, because of this, the feel of the MP40 may change in the future, not just due to balancing differences, but simply because of this mechanic. In my opinion, the best feature of the MP40 is its ability to remain quite accurate on prolonged bursts, though the latest patch has reduced this ability, but this is also applicable to every single gun. In my opinion, I think this is a bit too extreme on these 10 and especially the MP40, because these weapons do not have a very fast time to kill at pretty much any range. Despite this, the MP40 and also this 10 by extension have a few saving graces. The biggest ability is to use both hipfire specializations, which basically turns it into the MP18 trench from BF1, albeit without the ability to microburst the trench hipfire at long range, which is a shame. Still, the MP40, even on prolonged bursts in hipfire, is very accurate and can defeat people at unexpectedly long ranges for a submachine gun using hipfire. Despite this, you are still stuck with a weapon with a quite limited effective range and low damage per second across all ranges. Perhaps it is more consistent than other submachine guns, mostly because of its enhanced accuracy. For example, if you try and use a Thompson at long range without the single fire mode, well, you're not going to have a good time, and even with the single fire mode it will be capped at 450 rounds per minute, which is lower than what the MP40 can achieve with good burst control. To that end, I think the MP40 should be used as a proactive weapon as much as a submachine gun can be used as such, meaning that you will need to rely a lot on your self-heal and avoid fights that you know have no chance of winning, and also try and flank as many opponents as possible. While I and many of my clan members have a lot of success with the MP40, I do have my reservations on recommending it. Because if you want a hipfire monster, the MP28 with its double hipfire upgrade and gigantic 50 round magazine and much faster rate of fire is a much more compelling option, especially since it also features a single fire mode which can extend its effectiveness, not as much as the MP40, but the MP40 itself lacks this single fire mode. So easy to use, single shots at range is not possible. Well, the issue is not that it's not possible, it's just not as consistent or as accurate as the MP28 with its single fire mode, which actually reduces the base spread and overall recoil to the point that it's not actually all that noticeable at all. In fact, both the MP40 and the 10, well, I have trouble comparing them to other weapons. They are outshot by pretty much every other gun except for the Rebay Rolls, the Bren and the Lewis gun at pretty much all ranges, or at least they match their DPS up close. This DPS is somewhat made up for by the increased hipfire accuracy compared to any of those weapons, especially considering that hipfiring will give you a huge mobility advantage. Much like what I said with the EMP though, you will not be able to jump around corners and hipfire enemies just because the penalty to jumping and hipfiring is huge. You will be able to do so while you're falling, but not if you've initiated jump yourself. So, as a conclusion, would I recommend the MP40? Well, despite my enjoyment of it and, well, Perez are begging me to make this video, or rather Mira15 as he is known now, well, I really do not recommend this weapon as a generalist gun that everyone should use. This is because the latest patch has pretty much neutered this gun's ability to have long sustained burst, which is actually something I actually complained before the patch, where I said that the Sten simply can be mag dumped at almost any range effectively, whereas the MP40 has a very strange recoil pattern despite them having the exact same damage output. In theory, the MP40 is more accurate because of its lower horizontal recoil, but really I do not notice that difference a lot, and I am still puzzled to how horizontal recoil works in BF5 overall. Like, I cannot just see the horizontal recoil statistic and say, oh, this gun is less accurate or more accurate just by seeing the number. It doesn't work like that. It has a fixed recoil pattern of sorts, and since spread increase is also converted to recoil, that even makes it more confusing to discern between the two. I would have recommended the MP40 before this patch, but I cannot really recommend it at all. I will, however, say that the Sten is a much more practical option, since despite the MP40's superior, well not superior, ideal hipfire configuration, the Sten can do so as well, but I will never recommend that on the Sten purely because the Sten is simply more accurate because of its much lower vertical recoil and softer recoil pattern overall, and as such, if you choose the accuracy part on the Sten, you will have a very consistent submachine gun even after the patch, and actually I would recommend the Sten, despite it also being overly nerfed due to the recent patch. The MP40 I would only recommend if you're an expert player, or well, not expert player, you're quite good at the game, and you know how to you know the maps well, and also you can really make use of accurate hipfire, not just by mag dumping, but also by bursting the hipfire, which is something many people do not do. It's applicable to many other guns such as the MP28, but the MP40 actually does the bursting part better in my opinion. Still, there's not a huge enough advantage to accept the MP40's downfall, and as such, as I said earlier, I do not recommend this weapon. It is a shame because the MP40 is, well, a very iconic weapon, and the model and animations in game are simply brilliant. They are easily the best MP40 animations I have ever seen. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the MP40. It seriously needs a buff, particularly its time till the erratic spread increase and recoil pattern become noticeable, because it is set at 3 or 4 I think. I think it's 3, like all 540 rounds per minute submachine guns, which is simply not fair for a weapon that has this damage output, even with Medic's amazing self-heal ability, which actually usually makes up for pretty much all the other weapons' potential engagement distance shortcoming. The MP40 just doesn't really have a place as such, because the MP28, even the EMP and the Thompson, well, more so the EMP, because both the EMP and the MP28 have the double hipfire upgrade, and the EMP does fire a bit faster than the MP40, not a whole lot, but it is noticeable. And it is still quite accurate at range, especially since it shares the stationary accuracy upgrade that even the MP40 gets, but still, the MP40 just is not accurate enough to justify the drop in DPS. So that's pretty much all I had to say about the MP40. I hope you've enjoyed this video. The MP40 itself is not a very complicated gun to speak about. Even though I tried to find a niche for it, I just couldn't find an efficient one. It does have a niche, but it's just not expensive enough. And if it's not expensive enough, why on earth would you use it? This has been DanMinigun, and you've been watching WTH, or What the Heck is Weapon series, where I intend to cover weapons in their functionality rather than just focusing on the stats. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.